Good evening and welcome to Friday Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It's the 2nd of March today. Joining me this evening is
Yeah.
old favourite, I beg your pardon? But I said the 2nd of March. Sorry, I meant to say the 2nd of April. Sorry about that. Anyway, welcome back to Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialist Group this evening. Welcome to the programme again, Chris.
Good evening, Gordon. How are we?
Not too bad. Also joining me this evening is Graham Campbell, who we hope will soon be the first African-Caribbean MSP. Welcome back to the programme, Graham. How are you?
Not too bad, Gordon. And Chris, how you doing? I've literally just now had my first COVID jab a week
Welcome to the
ago.
club then, Graham. Okay.
And I'm not feeling the worse for wear. Even the actual jag itself is pretty
It's
pretty
pretty
tame,
easy.
actually.
Yeah. Give it a few
Didn't even,
hours.
didn't even bleed. Didn't even bleed.
Okay. Well, listen, let's get on with the COVID news this evening. First of all, the coronavirus update. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,826,274 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the beginning of the pandemic. Of these, 1,607,442 have been confirmed negative, 218,432 have been tested positive. There are 414 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. Now, of course, not everyone with the virus displays symptoms, and so not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were 4 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who've died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,614. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Over the Easter weekend, from the 2nd to the 5th of April, daily updates will be published to provide only headline statistics on new cases, deaths and vaccinations. There will be no updates to the remaining statistics. As of 8 o'clock this morning, 2,515,748 people have received their first dose of the COVID vaccination, including Graham, it seems, and also 414,540 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 26,816 patients who've tested positive for COVID-19 have now sadly died from their illness, an increase of 52 since yesterday. And of course, this number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. And now to tonight's main headlines and back to the election. And Nicola Sturgeon has outlined investment to rebuild high streets. Nicola Sturgeon outlined the SNP's ambitious plans to help local businesses recover and to rebuild from the pandemic on Great Western Road in Glasgow. If re-elected in May, the SNP is committed to the creation of livable, accessible places with thriving local economies where people can meet their daily needs within a 20-minute walk. Speaking on a visit to a local business in Glasgow, the First Minister will outline a package of measures to support businesses to recover from the COVID-19 crisis, including 100% non-domestic rates relief for retail, hospitality, leisure and aviation sectors this year, with an investment of £719 million. Then there's also £275 million over the life of the Parliament to support community-led regeneration and town centre revitalisation. There will also be steps to support the development of the 20-minute neighbourhoods and a £10 million Scotland Loves Local fund to encourage people to shop locally when they can, helping to keep wealth in their communities. Graham, let's start with you this evening. Now, the First Minister has taken her campaign onto the streets of Glasgow to campaign for small businesses. And we haven't heard a lot, really, from small business owners yet about what the various parties are prepared to offer them. But this is an interesting one from Nicola, isn't it? What stands out for you, do you think, from the announcements today?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't hear the announcement today because I was preparing myself for my jag. But I'm assuming that support for town centres in the 20-minute is all about making sure that people are able to come back to town centres, which of course will have suffered from the loss of large-scale retail, which has been the predominant way of trying to develop these city and town centres. In the future, though, we're going to have much more event-based and community-based interaction as the model that develops town centres. Indeed, if we can eliminate the unnecessary travelling that we need, and if we can have everything within a 20-minute walk that you need, school, hospital, leisure and so on, which is really the aim of that policy, then that will help to repopulate and replan and redesign the way we use our town centres. So absolutely, totally in support of that. And also it's an important part of community empowerment and development. It allows communities, and it goes in with all the other measures we're taking place with community empowerment, with land commissioning, with being able to control assets as well. That will help communities as well to take control of the direction and planning of the retail offer in the town centres for the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham. Chris, I noticed that the aviation industry is mentioned quite prominently in that list of sectors to be helped via the, I suppose it's a rates holiday, isn't it, really? Do you think it's going far enough? The aviation industry has been hit particularly badly, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, it's welcome for the aviation sector, but going forward, the aviation industry as a whole will need a hell of a lot more support, and that support needs to continue. It's not just a cliff edge drop off. Once flights are recommenced and stuff like that, I'm sure we'll have these travel corridors being reintroduced, but going forward, the companies especially, in the air sector will need ongoing excuse me they will need ongoing help because it's not just sort of like
it's not the airports, is it, Chris? It's not the airport itself. It's all the companies which supply services to the airlines, isn't it?
Yeah. But you have to remember as well that the companies that operate inside the airport lease the space from the actual airport itself. So it has to be a knock-on. It has to be a knock-on effect and stuff like that. So because there's concession outlets and stuff like that. There's bars, restaurants, shops, and whatnot, what have you. So, but I mean, going back to what Graham touched upon earlier is something that's quite close to my heart, and which is the actual redistribution of wealth within the communities. And once we see the gradual opening of retail, then we'll be able to see liquidity running through the actual communities again, and people starting to spend actual cash and not the electronic means of spending cash.
Chris, I've noticed myself in my own village, my own neighbourhood, that many of the smaller businesses, like the cafes and the restaurants and the shops, have actually used the time while they've been closed to renovate their premises and to modernise things. So there obviously is some optimism returning to the smaller high streets. Do you think that the word we're getting from the First Minister today in her campaign is the start of hopefully more help from the Scottish Government should the SNP be re-elected? Well,
definitely, yeah, but it's not a snap of the fingers or the click of the heels by the First Minister.
No, of course.
We need these corporate landlords to obviously drop their rents so that small businesses can afford it. And more importantly, the likes of charitable issues, charitable businesses itself. Whether it's running a soup kitchen for refugees or whether it's running a second-hand shop in order, for charity purposes. So an awful lot of thought has to go into this, and I'm pretty sure that the Scottish Government will do everything and anything to try and bring back the high street for us.
Okay. Graham, just before we leave the subject of local communities, I'm from a generation of actual shopkeepers. My family were shopkeepers for generations. And I can remember a time when my mother used to go shopping every single day. And she would go to the local shop and buy bread or milk or cheese or whatever it was. And it was a regular series of shopping trips. They would take maybe 10 minutes each way. Do you think we should be looking forward to a return of that type of way of life again?
Well, to some extent, we've experienced something of that in local community shops that have been able to remain open. The difficulty, of course, has been for city centre and town centre shops, which no longer have footfall, where the majority of their customers are office staff. And I've been lobbied by the Glasgow City Centre Small Business Association Alliance, and they've been campaigning for a scheme specifically, which has been created. The Scottish Government did, in fact, create a discretionary fund for councils to help bail out those shops which aren't forced to close. In practice, have to close because they've got no customers. Now, those haven't been given rent holidays, as Chris rightly points out, by their landlords. Some of their landlords will have actually got furlough money. Some of them would have had the cheek to have claimed money off the same schemes that, unfortunately, those businesses that they are leeching off in terms of rentals aren't entitled to because they have not been forced to close down. So this loophole affects taxi drivers and small business owners in the city centres and town centres in particular. So after the election, we're certainly going to have to address trying to save a lot of those businesses from going bankrupt right now. Because I know the problem I have in my area is that the danger of my local shop closing is that there won't be a local shop. I'll have to then only rely on those big multinationally owned corporate food shopping. So I hope that the habits that people have developed to go back to their local shops, back to fresh produce every 2 or 3 days rather than buying a massive shop at the week. I've stopped really doing the massive shop. I've stopped physically doing it. And I think a lot of other people have. So I hope that will encourage more people to use their local shop and recognise that if they don't use it, they will lose it.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, thank you, Graham. Staying with the subject of the election, a new poll has put the SNP ahead with 49% of the constituency vote and 37% of the list vote. A new Survation poll for the Courier and P&J newspapers has put the SNP on 49% in the constituency vote, with the Tories on 21%, Labour on 20% and the Liberal Democrats on 19%. In the list vote, the SNP polled 37%, Labour on 19%, pushed the Tories into third on 18%. The Greens are on 11%, Liberal Democrats on 9%, and the Alba Party is polling at 3%. The SNP have claimed that the poll is also a resounding endorsement to Nicola Sturgeon's leadership through the COVID crisis. The SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said that these are serious times which need serious leadership, and Nicola Sturgeon is the only credible candidate for First Minister. Mr Brown said that in the same way the First Minister has led Scotland through the past 12 months of crisis after the election, she will continue to lead us through recovery to build a happier, fairer, better Scotland and to keep our NHS safe. The Deputy Leader went on to say that in the first week of the campaign, the SNP had set out bold new ideas to protect our NHS, to create and support jobs and to take on the challenges in our society like child poverty. And when the COVID crisis is over, the people in Scotland will deserve the right to decide whether or not they want to become an independent country, so that decisions made about Scotland are made by the people who live here and not by Westminster by Boris Johnson. Chris, let me start with you first of all on this one. Now, obviously people have been waiting for the first polls to come out, particularly after the launch of the Alba Party recently. Were there any surprises in these poll results for you, or are they pretty much what you expected?
Pretty much what I would have expected. You have to sort of like say that, the Alba Party are only, 4 days, 5 days old or something like that, not even a week old. So,
too early to say, really.
Well, yeah, for a party that's only a week old and stuff like that, 3% must actually, be quite pleasing in, certain regards, if that's what floats your boat. But the main one that I'm looking at, obviously, is the SNP. But I'm continually interested with the polling of the Greens, because going forward, I think that if between the SNP and the Greens, if we've got a controlling majority, then we will have enough of an argument and a case to turn around to Boris Johnson and say, well, no, we definitely have had enough of Westminster policy, and Scotland decides to do something better. These people that given it, how many mandates do we need to be sitting on and stuff like that? Make no mistake, Westminster knows our intention. They know it only too well, and they know that we will not give it up. Just overnight on a whim because Douglas Ross says so, or is it Murray Ross? I can't remember. Boris keeps on mixing his name up, but it is a raison d'etre, and it's also the raison d'etre of the Green Party. So, and it only bodes well, going forward for Scottish politics.
Okay. Graham, I was struck by the fact that the main losers at the moment, certainly on the list vote, are the Conservative Party. And as Chris was saying, the Greens polling numbers are looking pretty respectable at 11%. And some people are actually expecting them to go higher than that. But of course, this is the first poll, really, isn't it, of this election. Would you expect to see any further movement in the polls in any particular area, or is it too early to tell, do you think?
There's still time for it to be influenced one percentage way or another by a good or a bad campaign. We still have 4 weeks to go. So it's interesting that I think the reaction of the Labour public is obviously quite positive to Anna Sawar. And,
Indeed.
I imagine that if Richard Leonard had still been the leader, they would have been way behind the Tories still. So the fact that they're in with a shout of actually coming second is actually a good thing for them, and obviously a good thing for Scotland, frankly, that the Tories are not the opposition. But I look at it this way. I see the list vote and I'm thinking, well, 37% obviously is a little bit worrying. It's still not
It's
high
lower
enough
than expected, isn't it?
Yes, it's not high enough for us to win list seats, but it's not far off. If we're getting into the 42 to 45% territory, we will win plenty of list seats. So we still have some ground to make up. On the Alba front, they are already in a week's existence 3 times the vote of the far left, which is about 1%, right? So, but that wasn't. And they are led by a former First Minister who's had pretty much free publicity for a whole few weeks. So, the fact that they haven't done better than that, okay, that's encouraging that people aren't taking it that seriously. But it will have an impact potentially on our vote, because I think if people lend their second vote rather than treat it as what it actually is, which is a party vote for the party you wish to be in government. In New Zealand and in Germany, they understand this. So their election campaigns are premised upon that. And unfortunately, I think we've had several years of propaganda, particularly amongst the bloggers and experts who basically mislead the public about what the electoral system here is. Because if you understand additional member system proportional representation, then you understand that the party list, that so-called second vote, is actually the one that determines who's the government. And it's pretty obvious. If you want a government that will enact an independence referendum, you have to vote SNP on that list, regardless of how you vote on the constituency. If you don't vote SNP on the list, you won't have a majority. Only an SNP majority will be taken seriously by our opponents down south. It's what got us the referendum in 2011 in the first place, and it's what will get us, if we want to do it constitutionally and with the consent of the electorate, because we'll have the mandate from the electorate directly, then that's the way to go. You have to do both votes.
Graham, would you say that with the stakes so high with this election, I mean, they've never really been higher, have they, that it's possible for the SNP to actually best the result that they got in 2011?
It's possible. It's also, you have to remember, I think they got about 53 of the 73 seats last time. It's possible we could do better than that. I mean, I would expect in my region, we would certainly pick up Edinburgh Central from the Tories with Andrews Robertson there. So we'll certainly win, I think, 7 out of the 9 at least. And we've got a really fighting chance of winning the other 2. Now, of course, if we win Edinburgh South and Edinburgh West, then we won't win on the list. That means I won't get it. But, I would still be happy with an SNP majority. But the argument has been from the list parties, fringe list parties, that we will win a majority automatically on the constituencies. Well, we haven't done it so far, and we can't take it for granted that we would win a majority of seats from constituencies. We need the list seats. When we failed to get that percentage last time in 2016, we didn't have a majority. So that could happen again. And okay, we may have a majority with the Greens, who their vote seems to be holding up, and it looks likely that they will get seats in every region. But even if you thought that a second party on the list was your way to go, you would surely go for the one that was more viable and more likely to get elected. And that's not these other parties, probably the Greens. So.
Okay, well, listen, let's hang on to that thought for later, Graham. We'll need to move on, I'm afraid. Still staying with the election, this time it's the Greens. And the Green Party has pledged 5,500 new teachers to help schools' recovery. The Scottish Greens today revealed their plans to recruit an additional 5,500 teachers to help schools recover from the coronavirus pandemic. The Scottish Greens say that their manifesto will pledge an increase of 10% of the workforce to help reduce class sizes and the teachers' workload. The announcement follows the Scottish Greens' work to make schools safer during the pandemic. In November, Parliament backed a package of Safer Schools proposals by the Scottish Greens education spokesperson Ross Greer, which led to the Scottish Government introducing regular voluntary COVID testing for both school staff and senior pupils, and the granting of £45 million for schools to recruit 2,000 additional teachers or other key staff during the pandemic. Commenting, the Scottish Greens co-leader, Patrick Harvey, said Scottish Greens have worked hard for teachers, support staff and pupils throughout the pandemic. Our plans for regular COVID testing and the recruitment of additional staff to cope with COVID-related absences were passed by Parliament and are now being delivered. And of course, we were able to force the restoration of all 125,000 school grades, unfairly lowered by the SQA. That's the difference Green MSPs have made during the pandemic. The Greens say they will recruit an additional 5,500 teachers over the next term of Parliament, reducing the workload burden and allowing teachers to teach rather than administer, which will attract exactly the kind of passionate people we want teaching our children. Chris, let's turn to you for a comment on this. The Greens promising 5,500 new teachers. These are high-quality jobs, Chris, aren't they? And they will help the teachers who are already working in our schools by reducing their workload.
Yeah, but not only that, obviously trying to reduce the class sizes as well. So I would possibly suggest that this amount of teachers is possibly divided. From actual teaching staff to support staff to ADSL learning staff as well, which is very important within schools. But going forward, I've always said, ever since I've been on this programme, I've always said that we get more work done in conjunction with the Scottish Green Party than what we do with Labour or, obviously the Tories, but, even the Lib Dems. And when I was on earlier on in the week and we were talking about the DeHunt system and stuff like that, the way that it only works really is for one other party. And I personally, I would love to the Greens to at least double the amount of seats that they've got. I think you would actually see a far better and more radical working from the Scottish Government, being forced by the Greens, and the stuff that they do on land reform and stuff like that, as well as housing, what we touched on the other evening as well. Yeah. So, going forward, they are the only ones that actually bring anything productive to the table, shall we say. So it's as well to work with them than anyone else, because at this moment in time, nobody seems to be bringing anything forward.
Thank you, Chris. Okay. Graham, I'm just thinking of what Chris was saying there about the Greens being one of the only party to really bring anything to the table. I was just thinking that the Greens are often thought of as being purely sort of environmentalists, but actually they have quite a strong record on things like education and employment as well. Do you think this is a developing trend within the Green Party in Scotland, that they are working for jobs as well as for the environment?
Maybe I'm not the best person to comment on the Green Party because I'm not a supporter of it, but I understand where they come from. I mean, I remember going to my first party conference event, and it was in fact the 1990 English Green Party conference. I actually played a reggae gig at it, and it was in Dover of all places, and there were literally 100 people in the room. So it's gone from being a very small fringe movement down there to being quite an important established pro-independence party here. So it's light years away from that. So to develop as a party, you obviously have to develop policies on everything else, not just the main thing that brings you in existence. Similarly to the SNP is not only about independence, but we have policies around policies for anti-poverty, education, job creation, so on, and saving the environment, of course. So the question is, what's your priority? And obviously for Greens, that saving the climate is priority. And for me personally, as an environmental activist, and we in SNP Socialists, it's an important part of our agenda. One of our first acts when we came about was to stop fracking being allowed and to campaigning in the party to make sure that we kept the ban on fracking. We were successful. I'm part of the Scott E3 coalition, which is the Just Transition and Green New Deal climate change campaign, which stands for Energy, Employment and Environment. So we are actively an important component of that movement. So we work with Greens and with socialists of all sorts of varieties, and many left Greens, what they call the watermelons, the reds on the inside, the Greens on the outside. So I recognise there's a lot of kindred spirits there in that movement. So yes, there will be many times when we'll have policies in common, and it's good that we can pass things that are in the interests of the people. But obviously, if they're offering 2,000 teachers, that's their gambit for what they want to offer support to the government.
5,500.
Well, yeah, okay, but they're not going to be the government. So it's going to be a question of what the SNP and the Greens can agree with each other. In practice, though, in Glasgow, obviously we're used to doing deals with the Greens, and we just united with them to pass a resolution around de-investing in fossil fuels for our pension fund.
Yes, we were reporting on that just only the other day. Yeah.
So that was a result of us, Friends of the Earth, and the Greens working together to put that coalition in the council together to pass a resolution on it. So we're quite used to this. But obviously, the Greens will claim credit for things that we would have probably done anyway if we'd had a majority.
That's politics, Graham, isn't it?
But sometimes we have to leave leeway and give them credit for something that they can then claim that they got that wouldn't have happened without us. So this is one of those, because in Glasgow we actually have a higher number of teachers per head than the average. But I would certainly welcome more teachers to reduce the class sizes, but also to, as Chris says, help with additional learning support needs, because we could certainly do with more teachers in there.
Okay, well, listen, thank you both very much for your comments. We're staying with the election, but this time moving to the Labour Party. And Anna Sarwar says that Glasgow will tell far-right bigot Jada Frenson where to go. The Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar, has said that he has no fear of standing up to the former deputy leader of fascist Britain's First Movement, who confirmed her intention to stand in the Glasgow Southside constituency in May the 6th Holyrood elections. Mr Sarwar predicted that voters in Glasgow will tell the convicted racist Jada Frenson where to go. The Scottish Labour leader said today that he didn't fear standing up to members of the far right, as their previous efforts to cause disunity in the south of the city had always failed. Frenson is a former deputy leader of the fascist Britain First movement. She intends to stand as an independent in Nicola Sturgeon's Glasgow Southside constituency, which is also being contested by the Labour leader. She's unlikely to attract even the 56 votes she received in the 2014 Rochester and Strood by-election, when she was outpolled by the monster Raving Loony Party. Chris, I know this one you will find amusing. I'll come to you, I promise, Graham, in a moment on this one. Chris, what was your reaction when you heard that this woman was standing against Nicola Sturgeon in her own constituency?
Well, I've just got two short words to say, and that's "ne passaran." You know, we don't want people like this in our society, let alone in our politics. You know, it's quite obvious to me that they are targeting the people of Govanhill, and especially the migrant community that lives in Govanhill, as well as the BAME population. You know, that is going to be our target. That is just something that, you know, Scotland, I am very confident that Scotland will totally and unequivocally reject that. You know, I mean, you know, Scotland as a country does not want to go back to the days of Oswald Mosley and the National Front. You know, so there's actually a group, if I can use this platform just to highlight a group on Facebook, please, and I would urge everyone to go along and find out what they're doing. It's Govanhill Against Racism, and fantastic group. They've any events in Queen's Park and Shawlands and the surrounding areas, they're always there to show solidarity and stuff like that. They are organising a kind of like a protest and stuff like that. So check out the Facebook page, and I'll hand on to Graham because he's far more knowledgeable in this sphere.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate also the shout out for that group as well. So, Graham, what do you make of this? What is this woman up to? Is this just a publicity stunt? Is she just trying to grandstand to gain some publicity for her very, very tiny minority interest?
I'm slightly surprised that she's not stood in the London Assembly election, but perhaps they realise they're going to get nowhere in London either. But yeah, but my two words would be different from Chris's. They would be Foxtrot Oscar.
Yes,
send her home.
Message received there, Graham, I think, yes.
Send her homeward to think again. And, you know, obviously she's doing it as a stunt. She may well come up with some of her goons and cronies. And, you know, if they attempt to do any kind of street-based campaigning, which is what they're likely to do, then they should be opposed and, you know, removed from the streets ceremoniously. But to be honest, they are not going to get a lot of publicity in regards to the mainstream election, and obviously they have their own live streaming websites, and you know Facebook is usually a very good platform for those sorts of people. Yeah. So undoubtedly, let's be careful and not do it so violently. We need to physically surround the woman, do it non-violently, and just make it impossible for her to actually communicate with any voters. So let's if we need to do that, then that's what we need to do.
Graham, do you think whenever I hear about groups like this coming up to Scotland to try and cause a confrontation, I would think, well, maybe the best thing you could do is actually just to ignore them and let the police surround them, let them just be on their own. Why give them the oxygen of starting trouble? It's what they want, isn't it?
Yeah, if we need to do so. I mean, it depends how high profile it is. If she's coming up here with 30 goons from England walking around the streets, then that is a threat we can't allow to go around the streets of Govanhill. The community will protect itself. So that I don't think we need to tell them to do that. The community is just going to do that. But if it's just her, you know, putting a leaflet through, I don't think it's not going to be taken very seriously. Most people will hand them straight back to her in a place that she won't find very comfortable.
Well, I think we shall leave that to our viewers' imaginations. Graham, thank you. Okay, let's move on now, and from Monster Raver Looning Party. Okay, so a former Metropolitan police officer has said that the race report consultation was like Faulty Towers. A former senior Scotland Yard officer has spoken of his regret at having taken part in a Fawlty Towers-like consultation for a report into race disparity commissioned by Number 10, as others continued to distance themselves from it. Dal Babu told of shambolic discussions and said it was clear that other participants were generally from the right of politics and came at it as though they had a pre-prepared answer for an exam question. He spoke out as the Race Council Cllr and the National BAME Youth Forum of Wales said that they were appalled to have been referenced in the report by the government's Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. Babu, who was a Metropolitan Police Chief Superintendent and one of the UK's most senior British Asian officers until leaving the force when he was rejected for promotion, said that he regretted taking part in an evidence-gathering Zoom session for the Commission's report. It was like a Fawlty Towers-like experience. We were told there were going to be ex-BAME police officers. I turned up and it was youth workers, a whole hodgepodge of individuals, he told BBC Radio 4's Today programme. Babu said that he was struggling to understand what the Commission had been able to deliver. There had been some positives around the focus on issues such as education and performance of particular groups, but it had failed to address what happened to young people when they tried to find jobs. Now, Graham, let me give this subject to you. Obviously, this is something which has caused a great deal of, I think, incredulity amongst the public as well, that this report has claimed that there was no institutional racism in the United Kingdom. It goes against many people's lived experience, doesn't it?
It goes against many people's not lived experience that they know from the people that they know that have lived experiences. Let's see this thing for what it is. For those of you who have some knowledge of Brixton and South London, of the Voice newspaper, a black community newspaper that's been around forever, Tony Sewell used to be a columnist in it, and he used to be the rogue outlying columnist who would always say the right-wing stuff, blaming black people for the racism they face because they have the wrong attitude, or because black men were emasculated by women, was some of the arguments he used to say. He's always been a victim blamer, self-hating black person, and on the right of politics. And eventually they did get rid of him from that newspaper because it just wasn't down with their readers. But he's always been a controversialist. So he's always denied that institutionalized racism is reality. And you see that with the way this report is constructed in terms of deliberately confusing and misleading the public about direct incidences of racial discrimination and prejudice versus institutionalized racist discriminatory practices. Racism as a system. He's always denied racism as a system, and therefore the people he selected to be on that committee with him, they are a puppet bunch of black faces for white supremacist power, and they produced a report accordingly. And he will get his reward in the House of Lords at some stage in the future. The difficulty, of course, is that there's been a pattern of this abusive attack on anti-racist politics. We saw that with Kemi Badenoch, the supposed equalities minister, getting up there and saying that critical race theories were somehow Marxist revolutionary things that were anti-capitalist and therefore to be rejected and not taught in schools. That they actually put a banishment on English schools teaching Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality theories. The truth, social scientific truth about racism. So, when we've got a government that's denying the tools which we need to understand racism and how it works, inevitably they're going to produce reports which covers up for it and denies its existence. So, but obviously we're fighting back, and this report will be used for the toilet paper that it is.
Yeah, it's funny you should say paper there, Graham, because I was thinking when I first read that report that this was a whitewash, and then I thought, well, maybe that's not an appropriate word to use. This is more like a complete redecoration, isn't it, of the entire subject?
It's trying to offset things, and as Leroy Logan, the former black police officer who's, you remember, if you watched the recent Small Axe series, his life story was one of the dramas in that, his experience of joining the police in the 1980s. And he was disgusted by it and said it was a utter complete travesty. It set back race relations in this country by 20 years, because it takes us right back to that point in the 80s where they were denying that racism was an institutionalized problem. And we have in London, the police is led by people who believe that institutionalized racism doesn't exist. Indeed, we had the Justice Secretary a few years ago, a guy called Kenny McCusker, who's now in Alex Salmond's pocket. Well, that guy, when he was Justice Secretary, also denied that there was institutionalized racism in the policing here in Scotland. Of course, he was wrong. They were wrong, they are wrong, and we're going to prove them wrong, because the lived reality and daily experiences of black people says otherwise. And many of our allies and the majority of Scottish public opinion agrees with us.
Yeah, okay. Chris, I'm sorry, we haven't got much time to hear your views on this, Chris, but what would you say? Do you agree with Graham's characterisation of this?
Absolutely. Graham is a foremost eminent in this field, along with their friend Sir Geoffrey Palmer as well. They have had to put up with this horrible treatment for years. And when you were saying about whitewash, well, to me it actually it kind of resembled a kangaroo type of court, and so far as that it was all sort of like prejudged and
predetermined.
It was just a matter of flicking. It was just a matter of flicking through the pages and signing off at the end. I think it was just just as that, just a paper filling exercise. People have to be aware that and again I touched on it in the previous evening when I was last on the show, as the fact that they're saying that it's not institutionalized, so therefore they can just wipe their hands of it and say, right, well, it's not our problem. It's the problem. Yeah.
So they're basically saying it's society's problem when it's nothing to do with the government, it's nothing to do with the police, it's nothing to do with us.
Well, of course. I mean, it's easy to blame society, Gordon, do you know what I mean? Because society can, 9 times out of 10 can't actually bite back, and that's, unfortunately, the unfair system that we have in the British Isles is where, the establishment wins, hand over foot against
against the people,
not just the people. Do you know what I mean? But the oppressed in society, the ethnic minorities within society. And it has to be called out for what it is. And an awful lot of people do use institutional racism, just as a kind of like, what's that word? Kind of like a soundbite. Yeah. But it's not actually, if you're actually saying that, you should know, first and foremost, if you're using that phrase, you should know exactly what it actually means. I think an awful lot of people do know exactly what it means, and it is basically purported by the establishment. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, the establishment are founding bodies of the institutions, especially in Britain.
Okay, Chris, your mention of other sort of minority groups, Chris, brings us actually quite neatly to our next item. The Labour Party in England is to destroy English local council election leaflets, which were anti-traveller nature. Labour is to withdraw and destroy an election leaflet which made pledges about dealing with traveller incursions after criticism over its use by a senior MP. Charlotte Nichols, the Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, said that she wanted to unreservedly apologise for the offence and hurt that she had caused to the Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities. The MP tweeted pictures on Thursday of herself and activists distributing the leaflet for upcoming local elections in her Warrington North constituency in Cheshire. But after being challenged on social media, she initially said that she was not aware of the meaning of incursion or its negative connotation, and that the party was sourcing new materials. Now, Graham, this is this is a different minority group who are being affected by what is almost the same thing, isn't it? This is almost the same prejudice faced by black and other ethnic minorities, except it's a much more invisible form of racism, I suppose, but it's also much more insidious, isn't it?
Well, I would say that for my knowledge of the traveller community is from meeting people like traveller activists here in Scotland, like David Donaldson, and he does some really excellent talks about traveller history and culture.
We had Davey on recently, yes.
Yeah. So I recommend the work that he's done, because he categorically shows that basically the traveller community in Scotland is a cultural and ethnic minority. It's a nationality.
It is, yes.
In its own right, with its own culture and traditions, which has faced essentially attempted genocide. That people have tried to wipe their way of living out of existence. And what Labour has done, that's news to me. I have to say I'm horrified by that.
That sounds horrible.
That's a new low for them. I would expect that from the Conservatives, because that's where they come from. But pandying to that NIMBYist kind of, don't have them in my backyard thing, it's just disgusting. It's disgusting, genocidal potential racism. So the fact that Labour is flirting with that kind of stuff, it comes with what Ed Miliband was doing in 2015 with those anti-immigration mugs. It's coming from that type. And they think they have to appeal to right-wing racist English voters to win elections, and that's just not true. We can see that in Scotland. We had just as left-wing a programme as they've had over the last few years, and we haven't appealed to racist nationalism to get elected. We've got elected overwhelmingly, election after election, with progressive policies and with progressive views on nationality and on racism. And part of that is including the traveller community, who we do a lot of work trying to work with them to help protect their sites, help protect their culture. We need to do a lot more, but I'm so glad that we don't have such a reactionary, toxic debate here in Scotland.
Well, it's interesting when I was talking to I'm sorry, I forgot his name, the traveller spokesman. Yeah, David. And when I was talking to him recently, I suggested him, because he was telling me that there were about at least 60,000 travelling people in Scotland that he knew of. And I said to him, well, maybe it sounds like you have not only a whole new demographic, but you might have a whole constituency there if the Scottish Parliament chose to recognise it. And actually to be able to elect their own MSP would be quite a step forward, wouldn't it?
It would, and traveller candidates have actually stood in quite major positions on lists in other parties. I'm aware of that from back in the day. So it would be good to see. I'm taking encouragement from the fact that in our party we've got BAME candidates in leading positions on lists and for constituencies. So we hope that to change the face of the Parliament. But one next barrier will be that last socially acceptable form of racism, which is that towards the traveller community being expunged. And for that, we need to recognise their political rights as well as their social rights, and that hopefully will be brought to bear in the future. And certainly in an independent Scotland, I'd want their rights enshrined as part of the law.
Chris, would you agree with Graham that the travellers' rights should be enshrined in law as well as everyone else's?
Wholeheartedly, yeah. And just as Graham said, it's sad that Labour have sunk to these depths, the same depths that what was his name? Murray Ross. That thing that he was this time last year. He was spouting his mince about the travelling community up in the constituency of Murray and stuff like that. And I mean, my dealings with the travelling community actually go back to Warrington years and years and years ago, 25 years ago or something like that, when I was working for Safeway. That sort of, like, if you could call that Middle England, stretched between sort of like Nantwich and Congleton, and then straight across sort of like North Wales is kind of like where they, because they like to go to the coast. Yeah. They like to go be able to go to the coast, and you can get to the North Wales coast quite easily, round about Cheshire and stuff like that. They are lovely people that as Graham quite rightly says, have got their own diaspora really, and they have their own culture, their own ethics, their own way of doing things and stuff like that, and that has to be respected. It really has to be. And again, this just goes along with the sort of theme that the programme's taken. And Scotland is a far more welcoming and tolerant country than England could ever aspire to be. And I'm really heartened to hear that there's actually 60,000 within Scotland's population. I think that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay,
well, the vast majority of them will be settled, don't they? So that's the thing, that the right to actually travel as a way of living, it requires sites to be made available, a respect for their cultural and spiritual sites and the pilgrimage routes they have. That needs to be enshrined in law as part of having that way of life protected.
Yeah, of course, those who have settled, Graham, would be able to travel if there were more sites, and so they could actually rekindle their entire culture if they were given the chance to do it. I'm afraid we need to...
Sorry, just actually to point out, one of the biggest families of the travelling community, it has to be pointed out, has served Glasgow for the last nigh on 70, 80 years, and that's the Cardona family, who actually, have put the carnival.
Yes, carnival people.
First and foremost at the Kelvin Hall, and then latterly down at the SCCC. That is a big family, and they have got.
Of course, they are part of the travelling community, although just a section of it. Gentlemen, I'm sorry, we have to. Yeah, Graham, I'm sorry. You're trying to break into the conversation. Apologies.
The Cardonas are actually show people, which is a different group of people. So they're not strictly travellers; they are different people, but they are a distinct group in their own way.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen, we'll come back to this another day. It's a fascinating subject. But unfortunately, we have to press on with our final story this evening. And this time we're travelling across the world to Taiwan. A Taiwan train has crashed and killed 50 people. A Taiwan express train with almost 500 people on board derailed in a tunnel today after hitting a truck which had slid down a bank onto the track, killing at least 50 passengers and injuring 146 in the island's worst rail disaster in 7 decades. The train was travelling from Taipei, the capital, to the southeastern city of Taitung. It came off the rails north of the eastern city of Hualien after hitting the truck, which had slid off a road from a nearby construction site. Some carriages ripped apart by the impact, while others crumpled, hindering rescuers' efforts, hindering rescuers in their efforts to reach passengers. By mid-afternoon, no one was still trapped, although the fire department said they had found body parts, meaning the number of those killed, who included the driver, was likely to rise. Taiwan's government said there were 496 people on the train, including 120 without seats. Many were tourists and people heading home at the start of a traditional long weekend holiday to tend to family graves. One French citizen was also amongst the dead, officials said. Now, we don't often have to, Chris, relate a lot of really terrible news, but this is an absolutely appalling crash, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. And, regardless of where it is in the world, it's really, really sad to hear. Obviously, there'll be the various safety checks will get done on it. Obviously, inquiry or some sort of thing will come out of it to see exactly what was at the root cause. But any loss of life is, simply shocking.
Okay, Graham, it's not a nice thing to end the programme on such a negative story, but of course, with accidents like we do have another story after this was. I will come back to that, but it's I always feel sorry for whoever it was, who was at the beginning of the chain of events which led to this accident, because there always will be somebody, whoever was driving the truck or whoever parked it, there's going to be someone there, don't you?
Well, clearly, I can say as a former rail worker, 20 years now since I was a rail worker, but obviously the health and safety procedures are a massively important part of providing a safe railway. And clearly, for a country that's actually quite good on infrastructure and organisation, see how well that country has done with doing the COVID pandemic, eliminating the virus. So they're a well-organised society. So this is clearly a blip. So something has gone wrong with their normally scrupulous health and safety around the railway. So I would be, I'm obviously very saddened to hear the serious, considerable loss of life, but I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of it, and the Taiwanese authorities will put right what has went wrong in this case.
Let's hope so. Okay, we do just have time for a final story, and it's to America this time. And Joe Biden affirms the US's unwavering support for the Ukraine. The US President, Joe Biden, on Friday expressed the United States' strong support for Ukraine in a call with the country's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, the White House has said. President Biden affirmed the United States' unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity in the face of Russia's ongoing aggression in the Donbass and the Crimea, the statement said. Now, Chris, we have heard reports in the last few days that there had been Russian military build-up along the borders in these areas, and clearly the Ukrainian government is worried by this. So how important is it, do you think, for Ukraine to be gaining the support of President Biden at a time like this?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as to say it's vital, but I would say that it's, welcoming. And Biden's, I'm just loving the way that he's sort of like, gradually sort of like foraging links, into Europe and stuff like that, and the wider Western world. See him coming out with warm words towards Palestine and towards Belarus, and and now the Ukraine and stuff like that, and obviously a lot of warm words and platitudes for the Republic of Ireland and stuff like that. And he's not got an awful lot, really nice to say about the UK. So from that point of view, I'm actually quite chuffed with him. But again, we have to be mindful, obviously, of the any military manoeuvres that the Russians make, and let's face it, they don't have a very good track record when it comes to that kind of caper. So let's hope that that they have second thoughts now that Biden's pitched his tuppence worth in.
Okay, thank you. Graham, we know that there have been some reports of sporadic breaking of a ceasefire, allegedly, according to the Ukrainian authorities, allegedly by pro-Russian separatists in these areas of the Ukraine. Do you think perhaps that the Russians are just trying to keep this pot boiling, to keep the Ukraine worried?
I think the Russians are clearly testing Biden's resolve in terms of, and obviously let's remember that just during the election period there, Trump tried to get Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, to collaborate in trying to attack Biden's son for corruption investigation. Yeah. So there's a bit of history here. So they only talked for about 40 minutes, but they reaffirmed the policy of the US to supply weapons and training to Ukraine. But there's no doubt that as a supporter of independence and an opponent of Russian imperialism, which is what Putin's regime represents. The Ukraine, they need to get the hell out of Ukraine and leave them alone and respect their territorial integrity and respect their independence. But it's pretty clear that Russia intends to annex the bits that it's captured and has built up military forces there because it perceives that Biden is less likely to militarily oppose them by sending US support, military support in. They're probably right that he's not likely to do that, but the Ukrainians have shown themselves quite capable of defending themselves. And if there's a side to pick here, it's pretty clearly the Ukrainian side. We have to defend the Ukrainians' right to protect their self-determination. But that said, we don't want a conflagration or war between America and Russia either. So the question is do the Americans give weapons? Do they give support? And by the sound of it, they've just simply agreed to continue the level of support they already have. So they haven't decided to do anything new. This is dangerous. The ceasefire in June 2020 has been broken down and broken several times by these invading Russian armies pretending to be local militias, but they are actually Russian state forces. So has invaded Ukraine. There's no way around that. That's what they have done. The question is, what's the world and what the Ukrainians going to be able to do about it?
Okay. Well, listen, I'm afraid, gentlemen, we have run out of time finally. But just before we leave you tonight, just a reminder that Broadcasting Scotland is still involved in a major crowdfunding effort. And so if you would like to support us, you can do that by following the instructions at the bottom of your screen now. But I'd just like to thank my two guests this evening, Councillor Graham Campbell. Thanks again, Graham, and to Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialist Group. And hopefully from all three of us, have a very good weekend, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Hey.